7 of the most recognizable names on the planet. Presidents, music legends, Hollywood icons, tech billionaires, all appearing inside the same controversial court documents. Coincidence? Or something far more calculated? When a name surfaces in files connected to Jeffrey Epstein, it doesn't automatically mean guilt, but it does mean something. It means proximity. It means access. It means a relationship, however casual and however brief, with a man the federal government has confirmed ran one of the most sophisticated criminal networks in modern history. And now, with outspoken figures like Mel Gibson publicly questioning Hollywood power structures and referencing Epstein's connections in interviews and commentary, the conversation has intensified, pushing these documents back into the spotlight. So, what does the evidence actually say? What do the flight logs, the depositions, the photographs, and the federal records really tell us? And what are people in power hoping you never piece together? Let's get into it. Who was Jeffrey Epstein? Really? Before we get into the names, you need to understand what Jeffrey Epstein actually was. Because the media spent years painting him as just some eccentric, hyper-wealthy financier who happened to know the wrong people. That framing was always too convenient, and it was always wrong. And Epstein wasn't just a wealthy man who liked throwing parties. He was an architect. He built an entire ecosystem, a social infrastructure designed to pull powerful people into his orbit, document their behavior, and use that information as leverage. He weaponized access. He weaponized celebrity. He weaponized the very idea of being connected to greatness. His flights weren't just vacations. His dinners weren't just dinners. Every layer of his world served a purpose. And the people inside it, knowingly or unknowingly, became part of that machine. The files that have been unsealed don't just give us gossip, they give us a map of how power actually works when the cameras are off and the doors are closed. So let's walk that map together, name by name. Bill Clinton, the president in the logs. He held the most powerful office on earth. A Rhodes Scholar, a 2-term president, and one of the most politically gifted figures of the modern era. But inside the Epstein files, Bill Clinton isn't listed as a head of state. He's listed as a passenger. Clinton's name appears across verified flight logs tied to Epstein's private Boeing 727. The jet investigators and journalists eventually nicknamed the Lolita Express. The October 2002 manifest is particularly notable, placing Clinton alongside Ghislaine Maxwell on a trip to Africa, framed as humanitarian work connected to the Clinton Foundation's early AIDS relief efforts. The Secret Service agents were reportedly present on portions of that trip, meaning official government personnel witnessed at least part of what was happening. Clinton has said publicly he took a limited number of flights on Epstein's jet and was never present at Epstein's private island or properties. But photographs from the released files tell a richer story. Clinton appears in images alongside Kevin Spacey, Ghislaine Maxwell, and multiple figures from Epstein's inner circle. His repeated presence in the documents is not disputed. What is disputed is the nature and depth of that relationship, and exactly what Clinton knew about the full scope of Epstein's operation. What's undeniable is this: Clinton had a verified, documented relationship with Epstein during the years Epstein was actively operating. The evidence places him inside that world on multiple occasions. That alone demands answers. And the files are making it harder and harder to look away. But Donald Trump. The social circle overlap. From New York real estate mogul to the 45th and 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump has never been a man who stays out of the spotlight. But there is one chapter of his past that the spotlight has been slowly, uncomfortably closing in on. Trump's name appears in the Epstein files, and his connection predates almost everyone else on this list. And the two men moved in the same social circles across New York and Palm Beach throughout the 1980s and 1990s, a period when Epstein was carefully building his reputation as the mysterious financier who could get you into any room, at any party, on any coast. Trump once said publicly he'd known Epstein for 15 years and called him a terrific guy who liked beautiful women, many of them on the younger side. That comment has aged very poorly. Photographs of both men together at Mar-a-Lago and New York galas are part of the verified public record. Trump is also on record permanently banning Epstein from Mar-a-Lago after a complaint involving a young woman. His supporters call it evidence of character. His critics call it insufficient. The files don't place him on any flight logs, but they do place him firmly inside Epstein's world. And that question will not go away. Mick Jagger. The photograph. Mick Jagger has sold out stadiums on every continent. He has been photographed with royalty, heads of state, and the most powerful people of the last 6 decades. So when his name surfaced inside the Epstein files, it didn't shock the world, but it should have made everyone stop and think. His appearance in the files is different in character from the political figures, but it is no less striking. A photograph exists, entered into the released record, showing Jagger in the company of Ghislaine Maxwell and others directly associated with Epstein's inner circle. It is a single photograph. It does not establish criminal wrongdoing. It does not place Jagger on a flight log or inside a deposition. But it does establish something that cannot be walked back, that at some point, one of the most famous men alive was physically present in a social setting that included Maxwell, a woman now convicted of federal trafficking charges. And that is where the story gets uncomfortable. Because Epstein didn't build his empire through force. He built it through photographs exactly like this one. Through dinner parties, through yacht trips, through the slow, deliberate accumulation of famous faces that made him look untouchable. Maxwell was his primary recruiter, his partner in engineering the access network that enabled decades of abuse. A photograph with her isn't proof of a crime, but it is proof of a connection. And in Epstein's world, connections were never accidental. So the question isn't whether Mick Jagger did anything wrong. The question is, the one that haunts this entire case: how many people in that world saw something, sensed something, and said absolutely nothing? Jagger has never publicly addressed his appearance in the files. That silence, in this context, speaks volumes. Michael Jackson. The shadow connection. He was the most famous human being on the planet, a man whose name alone could stop traffic in every country, every culture, every corner of the world. But inside the Epstein files, that name carries a weight that no amount of fame can soften. Michael Jackson's name and image appear in the released Epstein materials, and it is one of the most emotionally complicated associations in the entire file dump. A Jackson appears in photographs linking him to Epstein's broader social world, images that circulated within Epstein's own collection of documents and personal records. Let's be clear about what the evidence does and doesn't show. There are no verified flight logs placing Jackson on the Lolita Express. There is no deposition testimony directly connecting him to Epstein's criminal operation. What exists is photographic documentation placing Jackson within the same high society world Epstein carefully curated. Celebrities, billionaires, and political figures moving through the same exclusive closed circles. But here's what makes this different from every other name on this list. Jackson's own history, the allegations, the settlements, the trials, gives his appearance in these files a resonance that goes far deeper than simple social proximity. The questions are uncomfortable, and the answers remain incomplete, and they may never fully arrive. Naomi Campbell, the model, the flights, the Maxwell connection. She walked runways that made history. She graced covers that defined generations. Naomi Campbell didn't just become a supermodel, she became an institution. But inside the Epstein files, her name doesn't appear on a red carpet. It appears on a flight manifest. And that changes everything. Now we get to someone whose connection to Epstein is significantly more documented than a photograph or a name in a contact book. Campbell's association with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell is established across multiple verified sources, and it is one of the most consequential stories the files have produced. Flight manifests confirm Campbell was a passenger on Epstein's aircraft on at least 2 separate occasions in 2002. The October 2002 log places her on a flight that also carried Maxwell and other Epstein associates. She has publicly acknowledged knowing Epstein socially, describing it as a professional relationship common in their shared world of fashion, philanthropy, and high society. But the evidence goes further than flight logs. Virginia Giuffre, in her 2016 deposition, described encountering Campbell at a birthday party on a yacht in Saint-Tropez. She described Campbell as a friend of Maxwell's and alleged that Campbell was hostile toward her during their encounters. That detail in context carries enormous weight. Photographs recovered during investigations reportedly place Campbell on that same yacht, with Maxwell and at least one known victim present. And then there's the layer that makes this truly dark. Epstein allegedly used Campbell's name as a grooming tool, telling aspiring young models he was close with Naomi. That one phone call from him could launch their careers. Her name was currency being spent without her knowledge, or at least, that's what the files leave open as a question. Whether she knew how her name was being used remains unanswered, but the evidence of her proximity is not in question. Leonardo DiCaprio, the name drop machine. From a child actor hustling auditions in Los Angeles to one of the most celebrated performers in the history of cinema, Leonardo DiCaprio didn't just become famous. He became a symbol of talent, of ambition, of Hollywood, at its most glamorous and untouchable. And it was precisely that symbol, that name, that image, that global cultural weight, that Jeffrey Epstein decided to steal. Leonardo DiCaprio's entry into the Epstein story is almost a story about Epstein's psychology more than DiCaprio's actual behavior. And that distinction matters enormously. DiCaprio's name appears in a 2016 deposition by Johanna Sjoberg, unsealed in early 2024. Her testimony described a pattern. While she was performing massages for Epstein, he would frequently be on the phone, and afterward he would casually mention that he had just been speaking to Leonardo DiCaprio, or Kate Blanchett, or Bruce Willis, or Cameron Diaz. Sjoberg described this behavior plainly as name-dropping, what she called flimsy braggadocio, intended to impress her and other young women, to make Epstein seem connected to the most powerful and glamorous people alive. By claiming to be on a first-name basis with DiCaprio, Epstein was manufacturing an aura of legitimacy and cultural prestige. And he wanted the young women in his world to feel that if someone as globally celebrated as Leonardo DiCaprio was his friend, then Epstein must be a good man, a safe man. There is also a documented flight. In September 2002, DiCaprio and Kevin Spacey traveled to Africa aboard Epstein's private Boeing 727 as part of the Clinton Foundation's work on the AIDS epidemic. This trip was humanitarian in its stated purpose, verified by pilot-reported manifests, and was not a secret. that DiCaprio did not hide that he took this flight. What he almost certainly didn't know was whose plane he was actually on, or what else that plane was being used for. DiCaprio's connection to Epstein, when examined honestly, appears to be exactly what Sjoberg described it as: a name Epstein used without DiCaprio's knowledge or consent. His presence in the files is less about what DiCaprio did and more about how Epstein weaponized famous names as part of his operation. Because in Epstein's world, fame wasn't just currency, it was a weapon. And Leonardo DiCaprio never even knew he was being used as one. The two-line opener builds DiCaprio up fast before flipping the narrative, making the contrast between his iconic status and how Epstein exploited it land with maximum impact. The closing line is new and ties the whole segment together with a hooky finish. Elon Musk. The name that shouldn't surprise you from an awkward bullied kid in Pretoria to South Africa, to the single most powerful private citizen on the face of the earth. Elon Musk didn't just build companies, he built empires: PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink. And then he bought Twitter, rebranded it X, and handed himself a megaphone that reaches 500 million people. He is the world's richest man, a self-styled free speech absolutist, and someone who has never once in his public life shied away from a fight. He picks battles with governments, regulators, presidents, and rival billionaires, loudly, publicly, and without apology, which makes one thing stand out like a flashing red light. He has said almost nothing about his name appearing inside the Epstein files. And then there's the sheer weight of who we're talking about. The owner of X, the platform that now shapes global political conversation. The man whose empire touches defense contracts, artificial intelligence, and national infrastructure. When a name like that shows up in federal documents connected to Jeffrey Epstein, the world doesn't just notice. The world demands answers. So here is what the documents actually show. Musk's name appears in Epstein's contact materials, the meticulously maintained network of ultra-high net worth individuals, power brokers, and global influencers that Epstein spent decades curating with surgical precision. There is no verified flight log placing him on the Lolita Express. There is no deposition testimony from any victim connecting him to criminal activity. No photographs with Maxwell. No documented meetings during Epstein's active years of operation. But here's what makes this impossible to simply dismiss. Epstein didn't collect names carelessly. Every contact in that book served a purpose: social leverage, financial access, reputational cover, or future utility. A name in Epstein's world was never just a name. It was a resource. It was a relationship. And it was potential. So why is Musk, a man who has publicly sparred with presidents, regulators, and billionaire rivals without flinching, so unusually quiet about this particular connection? That silence isn't nothing. In the Epstein files, silence never is. The architecture of evil, how the network actually worked. Now that we've gone through the names, let's zoom out. Because the individual connections only make full sense when you understand the system they were part of. Epstein operated in tiers. At the outermost tier, you had people who were simply names in his contact book or passengers on a flight that happened to be on his plane. These were his social camouflage. Famous people whose presence in his world made him look legitimate and untouchable. DiCaprio, Mick Jagger, Michael Jackson, people whose names he could drop, whose photographs he could keep, whose celebrity he could borrow without their knowledge or consent. At the next tier, you had documented relationships, people who flew on his planes, attended events with Maxwell, appeared in photographs that have now been entered into federal records: Campbell, Clinton, Trump, people who had genuine social relationships with Epstein, whatever those relationships ultimately meant. And at the deepest tier, the one the files are still slowly, incompletely revealing, you had the people who allegedly knew. The ones who were allegedly complicit. On the ones who were allegedly participants in what federal investigators have described as a multi-decade criminal enterprise targeting young girls and women. The genius of Epstein's operation, if you can call it that, was that the tiers provided cover for each other. The presence of innocent celebrities made it harder to identify the guilty. The humanitarian trips provided cover for the private island. The philanthropy provided cover for the recruitment. And every legitimate thing he did served as camouflage for the thing underneath it. Here's the truth you need to sit with. The files connected to Jeffrey Epstein are not fully released. What we've seen is only a fraction. Depositions, flight logs, contact books, scattered photographs. Hundreds of documents remain sealed. Testimony remains unreleased. Communications are still buried in federal archives. So ask yourself, what's in the pages we haven't read yet? And why are some of the most powerful figures choosing silence instead of demanding transparency? This wasn't just the isolated behavior of one man. It was a network, protected by influence, shielded by status, and sustained by a culture that rewards quiet compliance. Some names reflect wrongdoing, some reflect proximity, and some may have been strategically positioned as protection.